You hear it before you see it. A scream, thin, far off, like a wire being plucked threads through the trees. The porch light flickers. Someone or something moves in the window upstairs, where no one is supposed to be. A mother grips her daughter's wrist and whispers, "Do not go in that room." The girl nods, but her eyes won't look away from the doorway that keeps breathing in the dark. When the wall knocks back, the family finally understands. The house is answering, and it hasn't spoken its last word. And to understand why a quiet white farmhouse on McMahon Road needed a full exorcism and why it still didn't work, we have to go back to the day a hopeful family turned down a gravel drive and met a place that wouldn't let them leave. At first, the days passed quietly. The kids explored the tree line. The dog learned every scent of the property. Then, small things crossed the border into odd. A door that had been latched was open. Objects didn't stay where they were placed. A figure, no weight, no footsteps, stood in the yard at dusk and watched the kitchen window. There were knocks from walls that shared no pipes, no neighbors, no reason. The family did what most families do, explain it away. Old house. It's the wind. It's mice. But at some point, the explanations started sounding like excuses. They would later call the house disturbed, not broken, not evil, disturbed, as if the ground itself had been taught to remember grief, and now it could not forget. Clara wrote the story down in a diary-like account called Echoes of a Haunting, trying to make sense of the days when sense walked out the back door and never came home. The first big spike hit one ordinary evening when a chill ran through the kitchen, though the stove was warm. A shadow rolled across the ceiling, not across the light, but inside it. The dog growled at a corner that didn't exist. The family went to bed tired and woke up more tired, as if sleep had to fight something all night. The next day brought new rules. No one went upstairs alone, and the children were told never to answer the whispers they might hear from the hallway. That last rule was the hardest to keep, because the whispers didn't always stay in the hallway, and one room at the top of the stairs was about to become a problem you couldn't paint over. It started with flies, not a few. A bloom, in cool weather, on clean glass. The family called it Mary's room, the small bedroom off the landing where the air felt wrong, like a place that hadn't seen morning in a very long time. The window there turned into a stage. Shapes moved behind it when everyone was downstairs. Faces that didn't belong to anyone who lived there looked out, pale, curious, patient. The sound of boots scuffed the floor when no one was walking. And then the singing started, low and old, like a chorus trapped under the floor. One of the children confessed she'd been dreaming of a woman in a long dress who stood by the bed and hummed. The mother confessed she'd dreamed of the same woman, except in her dream, the humming stopped and the woman pointed to the woods. When the family followed that gesture in daylight, the tree line felt busy, like a crowd hiding in plain sight. Even their visitors mentioned it. Stepping out of the car, they'd glance at the woods and say it felt like being measured. Local lore piled on. Stories about a hanging tree, stories about an old tragedy on the land, stories about a pond that wanted people in it. Some of those tales were rumors stitched from older fears, and some were flat out wrong. Legends inflated over time and repeated because they fit. But you didn't need folklore to feel the weight on that porch. You needed 5 minutes. Nights blurred together. Doors slammed. Voices spoke names. The phone would ring, and when they answered, the line was filled with their own conversations played back to them, like the house was rehearsing the family's life. When objects began to fly and people began to bruise from hands they couldn't see, the Dandys did the sanest thing they could. They asked for help from the church. What came next was rare enough to make the papers, and notorious enough to keep ghost hunters busy for the next 50 years. Because the priest who answered their call didn't just bless the house, he tried something almost no one attempts: a structural exorcism. Father Alphonsus Trabold of St. Bonaventure University was not easily rattled. He taught, he counseled, and quietly, he studied what most people refused to name out loud. The Hinsdale House would become one of his most discussed cases. On April 13th, 1974, he arrived to give the house a second chance at being only a house. He set the prayers like anchors in each room. He walked the perimeter. He said the words meant to shut doors no human hand could close. For a while, it worked. Then the house changed its mind. Activity paused, softened, then returned with a new shape, like a storm that moved off the ridge and circled back at midnight to test the windows. Figures still appeared. The sounds still came. The family tried to hold their ground because leaving felt like losing. But haunting, if that's what this was, doesn't negotiate. It wears you down. It wins by slow subtraction, of sleep, of peace, of the belief that tomorrow will be normal. In time, the Dandys did what exhausted families do. They left. The house let them go. It did not go quiet. Years later, when Father Trabold lectured about the case, audiences filled the room. He did not sensationalize. He described carefully a set of events that refused to be ordinary. He used a phrase that sticks, infestation, as if something had moved in, multiplied, and learned how to use the house like a mouth. You can debate the word. You cannot debate what that family lived through. As the story spread, so did the inquiries. Some claimed the Warrens, the famed investigators, stepped in during the mid-70s, lending their names and theories to the swirl around McMahon Road. Whether you admire their work or eye it skeptically, the rumor itself shows what the Hinsdale House had become. Not just a local ghost story, but a node in American paranormal culture. And when a story gets that big, it doesn't stay in a diary. It becomes a book, a destination, and eventually someone's responsibility. Clara Dandy, publishing as Clara Miller, did what most haunted families don't. She wrote it all down. Echoes of a Haunting reads like sitting across from a mother who is still trying to pick glass out of a memory. It's told in a near diary form, not to dramatize, but to put the chaos into a line you can follow. The house had looked innocent. The days had started simple, then the explanations turned into rationalizations, and those turned into prayers that landed with a dull thud against the ceiling. The book's reissue, Echoes of a Haunting Revisited, added new notes and made sure the story didn't fade into the fog of someplace upstate. Investigators studied it. Skeptics studied it. People who've never set foot in New York read it on airplanes and looked up at the seatbelt sign with a little more respect. What lands is not just the jump scares, but the slow corrosion, the way fear rewires a family's routine. And the house didn't collect dust while the pages circulated. Folks moved in and moved out. Some lasted weeks, some lasted months. Many left with their own lists, knocks that count, murmurs that mimic, footsteps that keep coming up the stairs and never reach the top. Local news pieces began calling it one of Western New York's most haunted properties, a claim that sounds like marketing until you spend a night and realize the dark has hobbies. Of course, the story grew antlers. People floated theories that the land had seen a massacre centuries earlier, that the woods housed a hanging tree, that the property sat on a crossroads of older grief. Some of that is murky. Some of it is folklore drifting in on the wind, repeated because it feels true. Historians point out that real tragedies in the region often involved disease and suspicion rather than the cinematic scenes people like to picture. Legends don't need footnotes, but people do. And that tension between what's documented and what's whispered became the house's second haunting, which is why, when a new owner stepped in, he wasn't buying a building. He was inheriting a question. What do you do with a place that behaves like a story? In 2015, Daniel Clace did a strange, brave thing. He purchased the Hinsdale House not to flip it, not to bulldoze it, but to steward it, preserve it, study it, and yes, let people experience it with boundaries in place. He fixed what could be fixed, kept what needed to be kept, and opened the calendar for daytime tours and supervised overnights. You don't have to believe in anything to understand the value. History, folklore, and the human nervous system, all under one roof. Guests report the same old weird in new configurations, that watched feeling at the tree line, a breath on the back of the neck in the small bedroom, EVPs threading voices where there should be static. Some capture moving shadows in the upstairs hall. Some leave with nothing but a story about an owl. That's the nature of these places. They don't perform on cue, but the pattern over years is hard to shrug off. Even hardened investigators say the house has a personality, curious, moody, and quick to answer when you think you're alone. Clace has become part of the narrative, a guide who knows when to switch the lights off and just listen. He marks the date of the 1974 exorcism each year, a reminder that the house has been through rituals the average home cannot imagine. He'll tell you straight, it's not just one story. The phenomena shift. The cast changes. The house stays the same, which raises the quiet, unnerving possibility that what's attached isn't an event at all. It's the place. And if the place itself is the problem, maybe the most important chapter isn't what happened then, but what happens when we try to prove it now. Modern ghost hunting loves its gadgets: IR cameras, motion sensors, digital recorders, gadgets that chirp and blink when the air feels crowded. The Hinsdale House has seen them all. Teams have captured disembodied voices, especially in and around the infamous upstairs bedroom, fragments that sound like names, commands, or a conversation that doesn't know it's being overheard. Others report the classic cold spots, the sudden sadness, the feeling of stepping into a room that remembers you, even if you've never been there. Skeptics counter with solid points. Old houses make noises, forests throw reflections. Humans are pattern machines, seeing faces in curtains and meaning in coincidences. They caution against repeating unverified stories as history, like the massacre tale that morphs with each retelling. The best investigators in the field actually agree. Check the archives, note the weather, map the power lines, and watch for contamination in your recordings. Doubt isn't the enemy. It's the filter that lets the weird shine sharper. Even so, some patterns hold. Visitors unfamiliar with the lore will stand in the upstairs hall, stop, and point to the same doorway. People who don't like ghost shows will sleep in the parlor and dream of the same woman humming the same tune. And then there's the porch. Sit there after midnight and you might hear it. Footsteps circling, testing the boards, stopping just behind your left shoulder, where no step should be. Folks come away saying the same 8 words in different orders. I don't believe in ghosts, but that was different. This is where the house catches you. If it were only a book, you could close it. If it were only a tour, you could laugh it off over pancakes the next morning. But the Hinsdale House is repeatable in the way good science is repeatable. Different people, different nights. Same choke in the air right before the hallway grows long. When the same details surface across decades of independent accounts, either everyone is copying everyone, or the house is copying itself. And that last idea is harder to file away. But there's one more layer, one that threads belief, grief, and responsibility together, and it might be the key to why this place won't go quiet. By now, the Hinsdale House is more than wood and paint. It's a conversation we keep having with the things we can't measure well. Maybe that conversation is with memory. Maybe it's with the past owners who left in a rush and still check the windows from wherever they are. Maybe it's with ourselves, admitting that some rooms feel heavy for reasons we can't explain. The church called it infestation. Folklore calls it cursed ground. Investigators call it intelligent activity. Skeptics call it a feedback loop, fear feeding on fear, coincidence dressing up as drama. All those terms point at the same silhouette, a house that behaves like a mirror and a mouth. You bring your attention, it brings a reply, you raise your voice, and the house will raise its voice. That doesn't mean everything said about the place is true. Legends about a hanging tree and a mass tragedy on the land look different under sunlight and library stacks. But the absence of proof for the wildest stories doesn't sand down the edges of the documented ones. A family moved in seeking quiet. They found voices that knew their names. A priest walked every room and asked whatever lived there to go. It stayed. A new owner promised to treat the place like a temperature you don't ignore. He still has the keys, and the door still knocks back. Maybe that's the real haunting. Not just that the house answers, but that it asks. It asks what we're willing to believe when the map and the woods don't match. It asks how we carry stories that refuse to behave, stories that make sensible people whisper just in case prayers into their coffee. It asks whether a place can be a person. Here's the simplest version. A white farmhouse sits at 3830 McMahon Road in Hinsdale, New York. People go in and come out changed, some smiling at how jumpy they were, some quiet as if a weight set itself down and stared back. The house doesn't prove anything. It doesn't have to. It just keeps being itself while the rest of us decide what to call it. Imagine standing on the porch as the first light touches the second floor window. The woods are still. The boards under your feet remember every step. You look up and the glass looks back. There is no scream now, no humming, only a feeling you could almost name. It isn't terror, it isn't peace. It's the sense that something here has learned endurance. A family once arrived with hope and left with a story that wouldn't let them sleep. A priest tried to quiet the house, and for a while the house listened. Years later, a steward took responsibility for a place that keeps a ledger of human nerves. In between, the rumors grew roots, the diaries became pages, and the upstairs hallway kept being longer than it should be. That's where we end, not with answers, not with proof, but with a house that keeps its own counsel. The Hinsdale house does not beg you to believe. It stands, it watches, and sometimes when the porch light flickers and the wind forgets to blow, it speaks. If you hear it, you'll know, and if you don't, the silence will be enough.